Hey everybody, this is Tom, and this week's character is Queré Domante for Windle. Uh, Pretty much as far as this goes, it was just about the straightforward approach that I do, or that I've sort of come down to. Not so much on the anatomy itself. I have started liking to just jump to the meat and potatoes of the figure in a lot of these. Even just getting more comfortable with like this sort of stick figure for the pose. Even though they always seem really basic and easy, and they always come up in very early stages of like how to draw books, I've always found them kind of hard to work with. Not like in a way that is actually kind of challenging, but without practicing enough with them, it's easy to not have them feel right early on, and then that's something that it was always just so discouraging. But I think just through working through it and moving along with all the different times that these sorts of figures come up, it does help. But even like adding a little bit of dimensionality to it, I think that for me that does a lot for it, as a way of turning what's really a very 2D-ish looking stick figure, and then turning it into something that has a bit more volume and depth to it, where it can kind of throw me off quite a bit if I draw an oval for a rib cage, but then I draw the neck coming out of the very top and center of the rib cage, even though the rib cage is at an angle which would offset the neck to one side or the other. And it can be, and that can trip me up. They've often just been something that makes things stiff, but I'm starting to finally get into the place where I think I kind of, for me, they work now much more as like a shorthand for a skeleton, or just like a quick little ultra summarized version of one. And then you just sort of can do point-to-point connections and all that. As far as the pose for Queré, it came mostly from actually I'm gonna use this as an opportunity to go into Simon's question here on Twitter, because I wanted to sort of talk about this a bit. I haven't talked about posing for a long time, but he was asking if I could talk more about choosing the pose, and I'm happy to. Every pose is something that has to come from either who the character is or what they do, or both. It is, as far as a pose for who they are, it's something that expresses their mood, how extroverted or introverted they are, their emotional state, their role in society, or how they view themselves, and that comes through in body language, just like in real humans. It should do so in your characters. And if you can think of real human body language, like in your mind's eye, just think about the difference in pose between a confident person and a depressed person. And even in your brain, you're either thinking of something quite realistic and down to earth, or something that's a bit of a stylized caricature. Both work depending on the context of the piece, but it's that sort of thinking that you take and you apply into your characters. You inject that, and you could think of it as like, in your mind, you've got this vision of somebody who's confident, and they've got sort of a pose that sums it up, almost like a platonic ideal of this thing, and then with that in your mind's eye, you can sort of overlay a stick figure, or like the little line art drawing of all their joints from point to point, and then you take that and you draw that down, and then you can pile on the rest of your character's body onto that pose, and you've got some personality in your character right there, or some emotion. That's sort of a brute force way to describe it. It's really just a matter of knowing people and observing people and going out in public and just paying attention. And if you're like on the bus or something, or driving around, as long as, if a passenger or something, just, don't read something or like look at pictures, just like study people, and that can help a lot. That's like a fun, well, it's not really fun, I'm trying to get away from the word fun. I can go into that if I remember, but anyway, But yeah, and so that's like kind of who somebody is, and the other source is what they do. In this case, I thought it would be good with somebody who's spry and young and feisty. She's got a bit of a chip on her shoulder, but something that, you know, striking an action pose, even just because it's also more interesting. But she's a teenager, and she's a fighter, and she's out in the world fighting, and she's got two swords. So, I mean, it's really rare that you're ever going to draw somebody who dual wields rapiers, and you don't draw them both out, depending on the personality. But it's a really good example, or a really good place to have something more dynamic like this. Something a bit off balance, which implies a forward direction, or like even like the starting off of a motion. And I think rapiers especially, they have a very, very dance-like and very dynamic kind of fighting style, or like body motion style, and it's really like, if you were sitting here, if you were watching me sit here, kind of bob and wiggle around, I'm kind of doing like a mime sort of it, but there's like an up and down sort of motion to it, kind of like a kangaroo, but there's something about being light on your feet but still grounded. Like it's rare that they're ever both in the air. Like it's not really like a jumping or like ninja style fighting system. Anyway, yeah, just something to me that felt like I had that in mind. And originally I was looking at Wing Chun, like butterfly sword poses. I just had that in my mind for some reason. I don't know where I made the connection, but I just remember seeing a bunch of different poses that sort of would have worked, sort of like to kind of get there. But even in this case, I think it could be said, not that it's what I'm doing, but now that I'm thinking about it, like in the case of using reference, I mean, this is like really just if you needed an idea, where you have somebody who has swords that are rapiers, but you're not using the reference of somebody who fights, or like of an actual rapier wielder in real life. You could get some neat sort of indicative poses or ranges of motion that you wouldn't actually get. So it's different than if you studied the real thing, which would sort of make sense, because anybody in this sort of fantasy world isn't necessarily fighting in the exact same way that people in real history would have fought. So there's room for a bit of disconnect, and it might even help. This is getting really like esoteric and weird. This is like the sort of thing I talk to with like other concept artists, but it's like shifting that standard or sort of sidestepping it, making something that's familiar enough, and it's like it's in such a subtle way, it's actually kind of dumb. But this would be a good place where you don't use reference, but you do rely on your mind. Normally I say don't rely on your mind for stuff, because you really can't remember what things look like. You can picture them in your mind. Like, try drawing your mom. You know exactly what she looks like. Like, you know exactly what she sounds like. You know exactly what it looks like when she's talking or smiling. But you could never... I could never draw my mom on a piece of paper without looking at her. Like, it's just... like if I spent a day, I could probably get something that other family members would recognize. But anyway, long story short, you can't just get something out of your mind onto paper. But in this case, that might be something you could try out, where you're picturing this overall summarized or iconographic style of motion for a character, and then you emulate that as best you can on paper, and it's going to be slightly different. So it's almost like it's kind of a somewhat familiar but distinct fighting style pose. If you were doing something like a game set in an actual historical setting, like something like Assassin's Creed, then I would definitely say stick to your guns. Like, it has to be actual historical kind of poses and like formal stances and whatever. But in fantasy, that's sort of that might be a good way to sort of break things from the standard historical look, if you need to, because it's based on Western medieval fantasy, but it isn't actually like Western historical. While I've got it open, Simon in the same tweet also asked about the why I'm flipping the image so much, and it's sort of a personal thing. I've met artists that don't do it. In fact, I never really used to do it until, at least not much until like a couple of years ago. But it's a good general practice. So basically, what this is for is by flipping it back and forth, you're counteracting, or you're helping to fight off sort of like a lean or a slant that your drawings will take naturally. So whether somebody is right-handed or left-handed, if they're not aware of it, their drawings will skew one way or the other. And also on top of that, it can be hard to see something being asymmetrical. Like even in our minds, like our minds can trick us into thinking something is better than it is, like better looking, more structured, better shaped. And if you ever want to be a bit shocked, if you've never tried it before, take one of your drawings that you've done and then hold it up to a mirror in front of you, and you'll be surprised at how wonky it looks. And that happens to me too all the time. Like I'll make a drawing in my sketchbook, and I'll say, hey, that looks pretty good, and then I'll flip it, and it just looks incredibly just gimped out and wonky and just totally all wrong. And it can be funny, but it's mostly just totally disheartening when you have something that you thought was nice and then it turns out that it's poop. But by flipping it back and forth, you're early and often, you're constantly counteracting that effect, where you do a little bit of a sketch, you flip it, do the other half, and you'll catch it early on, and your mind sort of won't let you keep making that mistake if you keep flipping it, and that counteracts that. Another reason that I do the flipping too, and this is like sort of my personal reason, is that I don't know if it's because I use a small Cintiq, it's one of the 13-inch ones, or if it's just my hand, but I find that drawing certain lines is much easier in certain directions. Like certain curved lines are a lot easier to draw from left to right, bottom to top, with my hand going in that one direction. But if I try to draw like an arc going the other way, it uses a whole different set of muscles that aren't nearly as easy to control or as coordinated for that motion. I guess I think it's like all the lines that I do that are similar in writing, but on drawing, is like stuff that I like to do, and then I'll flip the image so that I can still do that line. I can do the line in the opposite direction technically, but by drawing it the same direction that I'd always sort of do. Like some lines are well, almost every line is better to pull than to push, and that's something I've never talked about before. Pushing and pulling lines. I mean, there's not much more to it than that. It's basically dragging the pen or pushing the pen, and basically now that I'm thinking about it, the only lines I can think of that are good for pushing is like a straight line with a ruler. For the most part, drawing with pulling lines is you're going to be much better off. It's much more comfortable. If you find that it's not, then go do it a different way. But if you're curious and you want to sort of, if you've never been aware of it, see, there was a jump. I did miss a few chunks of time when recording. It was probably in total there's a couple times where it happens, but there's probably a total of about 15 minutes that got lost. So my apologies for that. But if you've never thought about the two sort of different types of lines, of pushed lines and pulled lines, maybe try drawing with that in mind and see if that makes sense to you. So I hope that helps. So that's my explanation for all those things. And it looks like a bunch of people liked my tweet asking if they had questions, but only Simon asked a question, so I hope that helped. Anyway, I've commented before quite a bit on how I find people of certain ages to be easier or more difficult to draw. I usually like to hover in the range of like 40 plus. I think there's a lot more you can get away with as far as like features and discrepancies and little details and greeables and lines and wrinkles and warts and what have you. It's a lot more forgiving for older people. I think it's just older people do have more detail in the face, and it sort of gives you a bit more fun. You have more to work with on an older face, and people also look like a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old look really different, but a 40-year-old and a 47-year-old can sometimes look like totally similar. The older you get, the more range you have, and pinpointing somebody's age can be really tough. Basically, you just sort of go for standard symbolic things. But a 16-year-old female, actually, let me just double. I hope I'm not getting the age wrong. Yeah, she's 16. So 16-year-old female is a little bit weird because that's sort of getting into like nearly adult. So they've got a taller, stronger body that's like post-puberty, but they've also got younger features and they look like children. It's like one thing that's weird is when you're in high school, everybody looks like they're like the cast of a TV show, but then after you're out of high school for a few years, even the grade 12s just look like children. A very strange thing that happens when you get older is just how your perceptions of different people changes. Even like as a kid, pretending to be like an old man and saying that like, oh, I'm 60 years old and I'm all withered, and now that I know a lot of 60-plus-year-olds, 60 seems young. I mean, you can sort of see the difference. But anyway, that's just me on a rant. But yeah, 16 is another one of those sort of tough things. Usually the younger someone is, outside of toddler or baby, it's harder to sort of pinpoint the age. So with 16-year-old in mind, especially a fighter, some sort of like highly dynamic, combative sort of character, there's a level of strength required of the body. So like thicker thighs, more defined muscular system, but that starts making things look more masculine and more mature. So it does have to be dialed back down a little bit. Usually that's a good way to do that is just with muscle tone and not having a lot of like really defined muscles, because that just just with like more and more cut and defined muscles. I mean, testosterone is a hell of a drug, and that affects the body in a lot of ways. And I think that's sort of, you don't want a character who's a 16-year-old girl looking like a 21-year-old man. And so you can still have there sort of a substantial amount of bulge or form, but just without too many like interior details that are too intense or too sharp. But also, the next thing would be like the size of the head in relation to the body, and in this case, hers is pretty much sort of standard, but it just slightly bigger. And then, just because I was paranoid about making her look too old, I overshot the eyes and I made them bigger than I normally would. In fact, they're there to sort of push on, like, now to me it works. I'm hoping to hope that anybody else out there looking at it doesn't see how big the eyes are and they interpret it as a younger face. This one thing that always drives me crazy is how big I always draw faces, and then how weird it is when I really sit there and look at like a picture of a face online or in a magazine, and I realize how tiny their eyes actually are, and it starts kind of weirding me out because I always think that they're a lot bigger. But that's probably, I hope it's just me. But yeah, her eyes are exceptionally large. And now somebody who is 16 and younger, as they get younger, their eyes become larger in proportion to the rest of their face and head, and that's sort of what you're playing on for this, is playing with those ranges of proportion that that when we see them, we interpret them in that direction, if that makes sense. So when you see somebody who looks more like a baby, that is with eyes larger in proportion to their head, or like a face smaller to their cranium, we see that we just read them as being younger. They look childish. Whereas if somebody's got smaller eyes and a face and a cranium that's less disastrously large compared to their face, then they're going to look older. Now, this was one thing I definitely wanted to go into on this character was, it's another one of those cases that happened again, where I was going through and I was dropping in all the different colors, like leather color and the skin and the shirt and all this stuff, and I was trying to do it all nice and orderly, and it just became another one of those times where I just said, I gotta do something different. I gotta just relax and just almost start from scratch in a way. And I went for trying out the render it first and then color it later approach, and that I think it really helped a lot. I think I was feeling really overwhelmed. I think there's this balance to strike before using the colored layer approach, where I think you really need to have a much more refined sketch laid out, and I think that's what the problem was. And so coming in and doing it this way, where it's all on one base color, and then all the rendering is done on a single layer of black, used with a masking approach at different opacities to sort of render stuff out, and then sort of adding color afterwards. That's a great way to help with volume and form and line art and just getting it all sort of figured out. Because even if you take a photo and turn it grayscale, it's the exact same thing as taking a grayscale image and turning it into color. And so any details or shadows or anything that you're adding here is going to translate directly no matter what color you put on top. Now you might need to tweak a couple things as far as how like the sort of the color of the shadow on top of the object, because not all shadows are just dull gray or like pushed towards black. There's usually a color shift as well, but you're basically just recolorizing it, but all the value info is still all there, even though there's no color. The value of the light still remains, so it works. Like it's a system that works, and that's a good thing. The problem is, the one thing if you're gonna try this out, and this is one thing I would recommend, is typically whenever I would do this when I was younger and it wouldn't work for me, is I would be usually doing it on a white background with just like black and white different sort of colors chosen for a brush, and just trying to render it out almost like using charcoal or graphite or pastel, and that's not a system that works for me. This is a case where if you'll notice the layer settings on the green layer called occlusion, that's the one where all this rendering is coming from, all this shading, is it's set to normal, and it's just a layer of black, and all it is just controlling the opacity. So any color that goes underneath this just passes right through, and you don't even need to worry about setting it to multiply, which you would if you were doing it, like if you had a white layer with black and white that you were drawing on, you'd need to set it to multiply, and then that really limits what you can do as far as then colorizing the shadows as need be, which can come in handy really a lot, depending on what materials you're coloring. Yeah, so this would be, I would recommend this setup as a way to do this, because then it makes it much easier to just color or to add the color without needing any extra steps. So Wendell did provide me a lot of information. It was a total of about 5 pages, 5 full pages. So I don't mind going through all of that. I like to read the information sent to me about the character. That should help also give you an idea of maybe where I was going from, or where I was coming from, and even if you wanted to, you could think about what you would do differently. That's another neat thing about concept art, and it's pretty much obvious, where it's like every character is different, even if it's a ripoff of a character that already exists. Which almost sounds dirty to say, but every time a different artist interprets a character as well, they'll come up with a different sort of result. So if you ever wanted to try out your own drawings, I mean, it's sort of a little bit more difficult if you've already seen me draw it, but anyway, yeah, it's a neat thing where everybody's going to interpret it differently, and everybody can interpret it a whole bunch of different ways. It can just get crazy. So let's get into it. So Queré Domante, she's 16. She's born in the 20th of Kythorn, which is June, 1477 Dale Reckoning. She was born in Regalta, Termish. Her parents are Andy and Cerelia Domante. Her stats: she's an Eldritch Knight, fighter, and a Evoker Wizard. At about 5. Oh, the fighter's 11. Strength 12, Dexterity 20, Constitution 12, Intelligence 14, 19 with the headband of Intellect. Wisdom is 14, Charisma is 8. Her attitude, in parentheses here. Languages: Turami, Common, Dwarvish, Elvish. Physical description: Queré is 5'7", which is tall for a 16-year-old girl, in parentheses. She's 115 pounds. Her skin is brown, chocolate. Her eyes large, expressive, medium brown in color. Eyebrows thick, black, decently manicured. Lips full, hair braided and usually kept in a swept-up ponytail. Appearance and build: she's relatively cute, toned, sinewy, but not muscular. She has a few nicks and scars here and there, but her left arm has a burn which streaks from shoulder to wrist from the lightning breath of a foe. Armor and clothing: armor is form-fitting, magical studded leather, copper or black studs with a reddish-brown tinge. Arms can be bare from shoulders down to show her scar, maybe even something with a short raised collar. Have fun with it. Pants are fitting but not necessarily tight. She needs to be able to move. Color doesn't really matter. Feel free to be creative. Boots. Picture attached to email. Sent me some picture of boots, which I basically yoinked one-to-one. Just when somebody sends me a photo, it's because they like the photo, so I'll usually humor them. But I usually do try to translate them slightly, or like enough that, oh, someone's shooting fireworks for some reason. Anyway, usually try to change them just enough so that I can't be called a thief or that I'm not doing anything unethical or anything. It could just be me, but I don't know how like illegal that is or whatever. Okay, weapons. She dual wields 2 rapiers with circular crossguards, which have been enchanted. Each is named and has the name etched into the blades. One is called Silencera, silencer in Turami. The other is Heartseeker, which is an awesome name for a sword. The blades are about 38 inches long, which is 2 or 3 inches shorter than a traditional rapier blade, and maybe a little wider, like a war rapier. Have fun with these. Wendell has bade me to have a lot of fun with this character, which is nice. Other items: a headband of intellect, a woven band of bone, Ioun stone of regeneration, pearly white orbits her head. Oh, dang it, I forgot that part. I'm sorry, Wendell. I forgot all about that one. She doesn't have it up all the time, so you don't have to... Okay, it's up to me. She said up to you, or Wendell says it's up to you. Okay, never mind. Brooch of Shielding. Not sure if you have the D&D 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. It's gold and she wears it across the neck of her armor. A magical short bow worn on her. Actually, that one I did miss. I did. Okay, I'm sorry again. The brooch of shielding. I don't have the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide at home. Dang it, I forgot about that. maybe I got that mixed up with the... Oh boy. Okay. The magical short bow worn on her back mostly. Backpack, she throws it down when she fights, but could be an interesting kid with a backpack look if she's got it on. I usually avoid adding just backpacks unless they're a more passive character, just because really every single adventure is going to have a big backpack, unless they have a base camp that they work out from. But yeah, usually bags, they're just sort of... Bags can hinder the design of a character in the sense that now if they've got multiple swords and they're on their back or they've got extra stuff, it's kind of hard even to look cool with a backpack. A backpack makes them look like a hiker or a vagabond of some kind, and it changes the personality of the character. It's sort of like seeing one of these adventurer characters with a backpack is kind of like seeing a teacher at the grocery store when you're a kid. It's like, oh, you're a person. You're just okay, rough backstory. Queré de Monte is the 16-year-old daughter and youngest child of Andy and Cerelia de Monte. The de Montes were a wealthy merchant family from the town of Regalta in the southern nation of Termish on the continent of Faerun. Queré also has two older brothers, Carlo, 16, and Adlan, 15, not to mention a host of uncles, aunts, and cousins. Ever the tomboy, she would chase after her brothers, following their every footstep and challenging them every step of the way, as little sisters do. Every day became about who could climb the fastest, jump the highest, hold their breath the longest, and throw the farthest. The latter once found them whipped by their father for breaking a few windows. Try as she might, though, the two boys were always faster and stronger. What she did discover, however, is that she always claimed victory when it came to contests of agility, accuracy, and acrobatics. Her brothers challenged her all of the time, and she loved them for it. Now, it was customary throughout Termish that boys began to train for possible military service at age 9. The de Monte family was no different. When the boys came of age, first Carlo, followed a year later by Adlan, they began training with their uncle Teo, a former captain in the Termishan army. A jealous 8-year-old Queré would sneak and watch her brothers train, studying footwork, movement, each thrust, swing, and parry. Afterwards, she would go off alone and practice with a wooden sword she had carved herself. Leading up to her 9th birthday, she begged her uncle to train her and her father to let her train. Begged her uncle to train her and her father to let her train. But women in Regalta normally took up the family business, not arms, so no was always the answer she received. One afternoon in Kaithorn of 1485 DR, a 10-day before her 9th birthday, an old friend of her uncle's, Don Valadino of Ammon, came to Regalta. He carried with him a blade like the likes she had never seen, a blade so beautiful that its likeness was permanently etched in her mind. Never one to be shy, she approached the man and asked him what sort of blade it was. A rapier, he responded. With speed and quickness she had never witnessed, he threw it from its sheath and stabbed at the air, in what to her was a graceful floating dance in which this man's feet hardly seemed to touch the ground. Queré became enamored, and at that moment she had no doubt that she would train with him. Night after night she begged her father to let her train with him, even so much as telling him she would ask for nothing more for this birthday and all others to come. I've tried that trick before. Though this caused him to smile faintly, Andy's answer remained constant, no. She spent half her birthday sulking in her room. Finally, her mother came to her and asked her if training with Don Valadino was what she really wanted. More than all toil, she sincerely replied. Cerelia told her she would speak to her father on her behalf. What she had not known is that her father and mother had already arranged for and paid Don Valadino to train her as one of her birthday gifts. Her other gifts, a matched set of beautifully crafted rapiers and from a renowned dwarven smith in Tethyr. For 5 years, Don Valadino, a champion fighter from Athkatla, trained her. For the first 2 years, he didn't even allow her to wield a blade. He taught her how to use her agility, quickness, and mind to defeat her opponents, especially those who were stronger and wielded larger blades than her own. Though she trained with many different weapons, the nimble and deadly swift rapiers were her favorite. Don Valadino commended her for her ability to quickly learn and apply his lessons, as well as her near-perfect form and accuracy. However, he noted that she had a very acute flaw which must be overcome. Queré was impatient and had a bit of a temper, both of which could easily get her killed. A month before her 12th birthday, in 1489 DR, her eldest brother Carlo turned 14. This was the point in a young Rigaltan man's life when he had to decide on whether to take up the family business, serve in Termish's army, or take the right of excursion. Every 4 years, 4 members of the Rigalta Town Council step down and 4 other citizens are elected to fill those positions. However, to qualify to stand for election to the council, one must take the right of excursion or excursion. When a young male turned 14, he could choose to leave Rigalta with only a few coins and venture across Faerun. After 4 years, providing he survived, he would return home with proof of his adventure and his accumulated wealth. Those 4 whose adventures and wealth were greater than the others that took the excursion were allowed to stand for election to the council. The following year, 1490 DR, her brother Adlan also chose excursion. Not to be outdone by her brothers, Queré made the decision that she would do the same when she turned 14 the next year. At first she thought her parents would resist her going off alone to travel Faerun and brave its dangers. Instead, they are quite supportive. No woman had undertaken the rite in 20 years, and it had been 3 generations since a woman served on the town council. Andy and Cerelia, though more than a little concerned for their daughter's well-being, embraced the idea of Queré being the first in over 40 years. On the 30th of Kythorn, 1491 DR, 10 days after her 14th birthday, she departed Rigalta with a tearful goodbye to her family and Don Baldino. With only her prized swords, a single set of clothes, some studded leather armor fashioned for her by her uncle Pero, a leathersmith, and 15 gold pieces. She smiled to herself through her tears because she was about to set out on the greatest adventure of her life. Personality, bonds, and flaws. Queré has a good amount of confidence, which borders on cocky. She's relatively honest, sometimes brutally so, which means she speaks her mind and often forgoes decorum when doing so. She's quick to threaten and draw. Twice or more her size have found themselves run through by her rapiers. She will accept any challenge without hesitation, though she's gotten wiser since she began adventuring 2 years ago. She now makes more sound, tactical decisions than she used to, though she can often get excited and rush in when a new challenge comes her way. Her loves are blood, family, and country, Termish, in that order. She is fiercely loyal and defensive of both. She believes that peace is taken, not given, which she now sees that by serving on the council she can ensure that Termish keeps its peace. While she has never really basked in the trappings of her family's wealth, she doesn't shun in it either. She has a keen understanding of the practical usefulness of coin. She has her adventuring companions, but the one most special to her is the elven rogue Riardon. They began their adventuring careers together, and she considers him family. She fears only 2 things: losing her family and spiders. Queré keeps a loose journal of her adventures, with more than a few pages devoted to all the various creatures she has encountered and slain. She learned magic from a companion to complement her martial prowess, which led her into the full-time study of wizardry. Her childhood infatuation with dragons and the tales of brave warriors slaying them has seen her utterly obsessed with doing battle and with true dragons. She played a role in stopping the return of Tiamat to Faerun, though she never faced the Dragon Queen herself. One of her first challenges was against the half-dragon Langedrosa Cyanrath. Cyanrath. I'm not sure if it's Cyanrath or Cyanrath, whom she fought and nearly died against in singular combat. She still bears a burn on her left arm from his lightning breath. Then there was Throstugrael, the young black dragon, also known as Velvet, who was slain. Her ultimate face-off to date was against an ancient green dragon, Vorgansharax, the maimed Virulence. With his death, she helped liberate the city of Flan from the dragon's clutches. Queré has faced many more foes, from cultists to giants to demon lords, and she's still got 2 years left of her excursion. Sadly, her older brother Carlo was due to return home from his 4-year excursion a month ago, but he has not been heard from. She fears the worst, but knows her brother and won't yet cry for him. Oh, and here's a second email that came in. A few things I had forgotten. I had a custom mini done for this character a while back, and she wears a red bodice, so the front of the garment is cross-laced with it being open toward the top. I was thinking about how her studded leather could be cross-laced with the black laces, or maybe even buckles, clasps, or chains. With her being a dexterity-based fighter, she was all about freedom of movement and didn't originally wear armor, relying on her magic to ward off blows. But acquiring the magical studded leather, she made sure that it fit her form and allowed her for the movement she was used to. Anyway, you can take what you wish from that and do what you think fits and looks unique. The following are just extra details, but are not must-haves. I would be interested in seeing what black grips look like on the rapiers, but I'm not married to any one color. Heck, one of the rapiers is supposed to be dark blue or black metal from its description, but I'm not too particular about this. Also, she carries around a dagger and keeps her arrows rolled under the bottom of her backpack. Last thing, I promise, maybe have a small potion pouch on the side of her pack. I didn't include the pack, so I didn't include those. Or worn on the waist just ahead of her left scabbard. Just a few things I had forgotten or thought of. Yeah, so that's it. That's 5 pages. A well-written tale, good, robust amount of information. If you're ever working in games, you'll be lucky if you ever get that much information, which is a shame. But I really appreciate all that insight and input and robust character development, and well written too. I like reading these things, so that's great to see, sort of see that kind of stuff shown up. So anyway, as you can see, the problem with doing this approach, where you render things out first in this grayscale, and you might have noticed it, is that it takes forever. It takes a really long time to do all this, to render it all out, and it takes hours and hours and hours of just working on grayscale in this. But the thing that is good for me that I take out of it is that I'm used to doing I'm used to doing stages like this that feel like a very early stage, sort of like a quick black and white thumbnail or something. So in my mind, and I'm working on something like this for hours, I'm thinking oh my gosh, I can't believe this has been going for so long. I'm so far behind. But the good thing is that you're actually doing a lot more work than you think. Because I'm used to doing a thumbnail, doing maybe a light sketch with some values, and then adding the color, and then rendering it again, and adding value on top of that again. But doing it this way, by the time you add the color, you're 90% done, and then you just got to go in and touch it up. And that's a really great thing about this. And it's even kind of fun where you feel like you've been working and chipping away and making no progress, but really you've made a huge amount of progress on a piece. So if you're ever trying that out and you're trying it out this way and you're feeling discouraged, just try to think of it that way. That's how I like to go through it. Now, I should have tried harder to remember, but there's a term for a lightning scar. I'm going to look that up. She did get a lightning scar from that dragon. The Lichtenberg figure. It's called a Lichtenberg figure. Lichtenberg. It's basically just kind of the scorch marks of that you'd expect from electricity passing through something. It looks like something from a video game. But I figured that it is something that exists in nature. It's something that happens on wood and different surfaces and on people's bodies. people, when they get when you get struck by lightning, you're left with a very distinct and very noticeable and iconic sort of scar, and so there is precedence for her scar like that. They do look quite a lot like the one that yeah, I mean, I was looking at photos of actual lightning scars. In the end design, I ended up making them bluish with little sort of almost blue magical embers in the wider parts glowing. Just hoping you could give them a bit more interest. Rather than just a scar. And sometimes, whenever I'm doing swords like this on top of the frame layer that I always include, it's usually just because, well, at least I like doing it this way now, but I started doing it off that way because it kind of let me avoid thinking about things like swords and bows and arrows until the end. I was just like, let me just figure out the rest, and then I'll come back to this later. I'll just put it on top, so that way I don't have to like accommodate them with the frame, because the frame is a lot more tedious to adjust around the changing design of a sword than, you know, just drawing the sword on top later on for whatever reason fits. Now, this is one thing that was nice, is that I had done all this extra work before laying in the color that I was I was ready to walk away from, but it ended up saving me a bunch of work because I already had it under there. Now that wound up good. So now I can just add in all these color layers, basically one color per material, or one color per material, and it's got all the rendering built in. Now everything does have, when you're doing this, everything does start off with a just a dull gray shadow, and that's very natural. Like, that happens in nature and everything. There's right times for it, but usually you'll want to add some sort of hue shift to it. Even if you like take the whole occlusion layer, and where you've chosen for it to be black, you can shift it towards like a nice dark brown or a blue. That can help give your piece a nice look. But in this case, since most of the materials were already quite dark, I didn't really feel the need to. I believe I did change the colors on the on her white shirt. At least I changed them the most, if anything, just because with sort of a thinner fabric like that, the light passes through, and it's gonna saturate those shadows. Moving on here, I had originally picked or chosen a color for the leather. It was a dark sort of maroon, but with the black background and all these other darker colors, I just quickly inverted it, and it turned into this bright blue. You can see even here like how the brighter blue helps see the border of shapes in the values, and then once it was ready, I just inverted it back. And you can just, if you're going to use this sort of layer approach, you can choose any color you want and just adjust it once you've got it in the right place. Now this headset here that she's got, it's this crown. Let me just double check what it's called. The headband of intellect. It's just in parentheses here, described as a woven band of bone. I didn't know exactly how to take that. This is one of those things that if you were designing a character for a project, you would probably wind up doing about 30 or 40 different iterations of this object. I mean, basically what I was thinking is, I mean, I just have to make up my mind and go. Like, I'm doing these within, like, usually under 7 hours, and then moving on. So I gotta sort of just pick one that I think is gonna work, use my gut, and go with it. So when I heard of a woven band of bone, I'm getting, I mean, there's so many options already, but I'm picturing something where they're taking ribs and maybe strips of skull, and steaming them for a long time, and then when they're soft, weaving them together and then binding them with some sort of like rawhide or sinew or even thread. And that's basically what I've done with the way that they are. So they kind of go up and down and they're woven around together. Not too ornate or anything, but it's something that's sort of up there and focused around the center of the forehead. And then just attached to a simple leather sort of tiara that can be woven into hair and attached that way. It's very fun working on the face. Faces are monumentally complex things to work on. One thing I always recommend is when you're working on faces to pull up a picture, even of just a random stranger online, of someone who has a face that has certain aspects in common to what you're going for. Just really loose. Like it doesn't have to look exactly like them or anything, but it's good to just notice. It's just good for noticing those subtle things, like in Queré's case, there's like the lighting around her, under her lower eyelid, just towards her nose there, above her cheek. There's like that little strip where it gets quite light, and I've always been really jealous of one of my friends who's an artist, and she does a really great job of adding those sorts of little details where I wouldn't be, just because of like the planes of the face. I mean, that's where the light is hitting and it works, but I've always been inspired whenever I see that, and like different, just the way that like where the highlights and things on a face can show up. And if you just have a single photo of anybody sort of up and out there, those are some of those sort of subtle details that I don't think comes naturally to people. So I hope that makes sense. But that's one thing that I'd want to explain. I'd want to recommend is just having photos of real people to just help you get a sense of the nuances. There is a very subtle difference, and most people who aren't artists don't notice it, but there's a big difference between even a realistic drawing of a face and a without reference and one drawn with reference. A realistic face, whether it's a drawing or a 3D model and photo reference wasn't used, or if it wasn't really based on a real person, to me it stands out and it just falls flat. Even if it looks nothing like the reference, nothing like the person that you're basing it on, your faces are always going to look better. They're going to be so much all the more closer to having like a soul, if they're being not even inspired, but just like influenced in some measure by a real face. Even if they don't look anything like them, there's going to be all these little sparkles and twinkles that fall through, and a little bit of magic that gets in there. And I totally recommend it. Even just, I think faces are one of those things where people should avoid drawing them from only ever drawing them from their mind. It's fine if you're just if you just got to draw a quick face or whatever and just, put something in there. But if you're designing a character, like a character with a story and a role and a history, you've got to use a real face. Not like a celebrity. It can just be anybody. If they like look close enough to them, or if they have that little extra bit in common with them. But it's got to be done. No matter how good you are at faces, they're always better with reference. Maybe with her shoulder pads and the arm around her hips. It is just sort of leather stuff, but I wanted something that still offered quite a lot of protection, but was also really largely quite flexible. So the shoulder pads I imagine being actually quite floppy and bouncy, and they're sort of round and open. They're round so that they don't have nearly as like many edges that could be caught on an arm or anything. You can sort of move your arm around like in any sort of direction without things getting like... Basically, it's like your arm would be grinding along the underside of a circle, and it's not going to be getting caught on anything. And then incorporating the laces with the leather strips into the bodice that she wears. Now, I don't really know exactly how those are attached once they go through those larger eyelets. But through the descriptions that Wendell provided, I thought it was I like the idea of them having kind of like an overlapping, kind of like interwoven sort of look. And I think with the lace work up the bodice, or up the front of the bodice there, and the overlapping, I guess I see them as leather strips rather than any sort of thread work going into those extra holes on the bodice. I like the zigzags there. Now, as far as this black, this dark blue metal, I don't know if there's no mention of it being a certain metal that has this kind of color. There are no blue metals like that. There's the only colored metals are gold and copper. I mean, and then there's the alloys, of course, like brass and bronze and stuff. But metal is only ever really colored naturally yellow or gray, basically. But there is I don't remember what it's called, but in medieval times they would I mean they do it all the time. It happens now, where it's like if you're welding something and you're adding a lot of heat to metal, it turns this rich dark blue, like the one that I've added here. And there are some examples of really wealthy people having suits of armor where the whole thing was actually heated up to that temperature, so it was this like bright, shiny circus blue. It was a neat look, but extremely difficult to maintain. I like thinking of this one, or like extremely difficult to keep consistent. Like you needed to be like a highly trained or highly skilled blacksmith in order to pull that off and make it look any good. Otherwise, it'd be too blotchy and inconsistent. But in the case of this sword, I mean, it was made by like a master blacksmith dwarf, so you know it's made in good hands. So I'm okay with it just being a bluish thing all throughout. It's fine by me. And then this one is, I made this one Heartseeker, and so it's a little cheesy, but having just like the heart symbol stylized in the handle with like the crossbars. Nothing quite as mind-blowing for what's it called? Silencera. And I'm just hinting at this is just hinting at some sort of etched name, some sort of strange fantastical language. So right there I was able to alter the, like, since now this is something I regretted. I should have done the scar on its own layer entirely instead of the tonal value layer. But by doing it this way, I'm at least able to create a clipping mask layer above it and add the color directly just to the layer, so I don't have to worry about meddling into the color of skin or the rendering around it too badly. And then once I add it here, I can just change it with the slider. But my thoughts were just having I mean, lightning is usually typically blue, and just having like some sort of burning ember, kind of like a tree that got blasted with lightning. I think I saw a tree that got blasted with lightning in a park a couple weeks ago, and it wasn't burning or anything, but it was a neat look. So that's Queré Domante for Wendell, for the free weekly character art lottery. Thanks to everybody for participating. I'm still really enjoying doing it for you guys. This has been a blast, and the amount that's been done already is starting to pile up, and it's starting to look really neat just having them all together. It makes me glad. But this is for the free weekly character art lottery held every Monday on Twitter. Just follow me at RND Fantasy, and every Sunday I announce which hashtag to tweet in order to enter, and I'll draw your original fantasy pen and paper characters free of charge if you win. And anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Hope it helped.